Good morning, Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another edition of Lovin Daily, brought to you by Browns and You. I am Jonathan Chilia, joined by my co-host Chris Pergine, and here are your headlines for today. Robert Abela declares the pandemic is behind us. Backlash after the beachside Lido's party packs out. Malta reacts to Robert Abela's controversial amnesty scheme. Jorgen Fenech is back in court today. And patrol boat officers and prime minister cleared of migrant homicide. Chris, we've got quite a list of headlines today. Let's just jump right into the first story, shall we?
Absolutely. So yesterday, I think the big story of the weekend was the interview that the Prime Minister Robert Abela gave to his own party TV station, where he declared a number of hugely important news items, and obviously triggered a bit of backlash for doing so, not through an official press conference, but through an interview on one TV. But what were the news items? So first of all, he declared that the pandemic is behind us. Highly controversial statement. Obviously, he's taking responsibility for it. So now we need to see today whether Charmaine Gauci, the Superintendent of Public Health, agrees with that statement or not. We know many health authorities have already said that they're much more cautious about that. But some big announcements. The airport and the ports are going to reopen on the 1st of July. We're hearing today that some 19 destinations will be offered from Malta. In terms of the ports, obviously that brings up questions about what's happening with the flotilla of migrants that the government is paying for outside of our waters, whether those will be allowed to be brought in. Other things announced yesterday is that a lot of the restrictive measures, the rest of the restrictive measures, are going to be softened by this Friday. So suddenly we're going to be able to go to gyms, we're going to be able to go to bars, we're going to be able to go to all these places that previously we were not able to go to. So we're expecting a press conference this evening to make more clear these arrangements and these news items, and also any arrangements that are going to be put in place to ensure some sort of social distancing. Another big item is that there will be a SNAP budget next Monday. The Prime Minister said he really wants to encourage people to spend money, to invest money, and not to be lazy. And he also addressed the point of whether there is going to be an election later this year. We know that opposition leader Adrian Delia has been warning for a while that an election could take place. The Prime Minister said in no uncertain terms that he's staying here till the end of his mandate, which is until 2022. So no election, but a big budget next week, and a lot of reduction of the measures in place. And obviously the famous amnesty, but we'll discuss that in two stories time, because there's so much to say about that. In the meantime, in lighter news, I guess, or related news, what happened at Surfside yesterday, Jonathan?
So, I mean, this goes back to the fact that apparently the pandemic is behind us. So if you were in Sliema or St. Julian's last night, it seems like the pandemic was well and truly behind us, because people were out, people were partying. One popular beachside Lido, Surfside, very, very popular place. A lot of people love it. A lot of my friends love it. They had a bit of a party going on last night. I mean, by 9 p.m., they were packed out. There were videos and photos circulating around social media showing a proper party going down. There was a DJ. Social distancing measures were out the window, probably thrown into the sea nearby. And a lot of people had a lot of backlash to this. A lot of people were not happy with the fact that hours or days or just 1 week after the first Lido opened last week, there was already full-on parties happening again. And remember, these aren't even in clubs. These are just in Lidos. So now the club industry is very concerned about what the future is. But going back to what happened last night, we spoke to the manager or the owner of the place, and he said, even if I had 50 bouncers, I wouldn't have been able to stop the party. Basically, a lot of the clubs, and in fact, this Lido as well, they're splitting things up into tables of 6. So they'll set up a table and 6 people can be there, and there'll be either a cordon off or something like this. But as soon as the drink started flowing, as soon as the DJ started hyping the place up, clearly people couldn't resist the party, Chris.
Yeah, it was almost as if Sliema had won the Football League, right? So, Floriana supporters were especially up in arms because of what's happening in Surfside. They were inboxing and sharing all sorts of messages saying, we got in trouble and these guys aren't getting in trouble. Obviously, you have to read what happened at Surfside as well in the context of what the Prime Minister said earlier that day, as in if you've got the Prime Minister saying the pandemic is behind us and no one's going to get fined and, all of these things, then, this kind of happens. As you said, the owner of Surfside did say that they closed down things at 9:20 before the police and the MTA officials arrived because they too were concerned. But they were saying, what could we do if you have people drinking and getting drunk and standing up, going to the toilet and then dancing and meeting other people? How do you break it all up? So this is going to be one of the difficulties that entertainment venues will have if we continue with social distancing rules. We'll see what happens over there. So going to the amnesty and fines, I think this was the massive talking point from yesterday. All of our news feeds were inundated with people reacting mostly extremely negatively to the Prime Minister's statement that anyone who was fined in the last few weeks due to COVID restrictions is going to be forgiven and given even a refund and these sort of things. There's going to be an amnesty in this case, and I think most people got very angry at the idea because it's a bit of a slap in the face for those who really obeyed the rules, for those who took their time to be as disciplined as possible, and also there's this big fear that if we need to reinstate in any way these rules, then people aren't going to take the fine seriously. What do you make of this, Jonathan?
No, I mean, what really struck me here was just the spread of different groups with different interests all coming together to say, listen, have we really thought this through? So we had, people from the police union, we had frontline workers, we had opposition leader Adrian Delia, all commenting and asking, if this made sense. I mean, there was quite a lot of backlash to this. So I can't even imagine what the government must have been thinking. I wonder if, they had to call a surprise Zoom meeting to see if, they're going to tail back what freedoms they had given. But I think, seeing what happened with Florian FC recently, it shows that, there's still a lot of weight being given to how the public wants social distancing to continue and for these measures to be taken. And in fact, talking about Florian FC, 4 people have been charged over the celebration that happened in the granaries. I'm not sure if they're going to be getting amnesty. 43 other people have been fined as well. So there has been movement on that case. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation because I can see that the government wants to kind of allay the fears of the nation to say, listen, guys, it's time to move forward slowly. But there's a lot of backlash to it. So
Sorry, there's another point as well, which I think, must be said. People like Pepe Azzopardi, people like Franco De Bono have made this point, which is one, the point of these measures wasn't to raise money by government in any way, and also there's a lot of people struggling financially at the moment. So the last thing they need to deal with is a €3,000 fine or a €10,000 fine, whatever they've been given. Kind of, there is that other side to it, but I think it was pretty united, the response against this, and now we'll see how the Prime Minister sort of rolls it back. I guess there will be some sort of rolling back because ultimately this was designed probably to be a sort of populist measure, but it wasn't very popular at all. So,
talking about rolling back, hopefully today in court we'll get some more facts rolled back. Today in court, Jürgen Fenech will be in court today. There will be more testimony in connection with the assassination of Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. In fact, I think right now on lovinmalta.com as well as our Facebook page, you can find a live blog following the case. Very, very interesting stuff, guys. So basically today, a lot of fresh details are expected to emerge in relation to middleman Melvin Thelma. So I know it's been a bit of a gap since the story was in the news. But if you remember, Melvin Thelma, who is literally in the middle of all of this, had secretly recorded some conversations. Some of these have already been played, but more are expected to be played in court today. So, Chris, I mean, is anything expected in particular to be coming out today in court?
Yeah, so look, for those of you who don't remember, because I think it's worth recapping this, Melvin Toma has been granted a presidential pardon, right, to spill the beans effectively on Jürgen Fenech. Melvin Toma was a very, very close associate of Jürgen Fenech, was his driver, was his confidant. And what happened is that when he was getting quite paranoid about what happened with the murder, he thought he was going to be ratted out by Jürgen Fenech. He started to record himself and his conversations with Jürgen Fenech. And then the police were actually tracking Melvin Toma. Eventually they caught him, and they also caught all these tapes that he had recorded. And so these tapes sort of detail a lot of the conversations with Jürgen Fenech about the murder. There's a lot of mention of Keith Schembri, the Prime Minister's former chief of staff, in these conversations. There's also mention of Ishich. It's a reference to Joseph Muscat, the Prime Minister. So, I think what people would be looking at is not only what are the criminal implications of these recordings in terms of Jürgen Fenech, but also whether the presidential pardon given to Melvin Toma was justifiable, and also what are the political ramifications. Who else was involved in this murder? Who else helped cover up the murder? And these are things that we expect to come out in court over the next few weeks. And obviously, we also know that now is a time when the police is particularly under scrutiny. There's the idea that there's going to be a new police commissioner. There's that race going on at the moment for a new police commissioner. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens in this case and other cases regarding the police investigations into criminal and criminal activity and corruption in the past few years. So I think we can move on to our last story of the day, which is which came out on Saturday. This was the court's magistrate Joe Mifsud has effectively cleared the government, the Prime Minister, the Brigadier, and the patrol boat forces over the incident in which migrants were left at sea to die and then returned back to Libya, and also the incident in where they were sort of directed onto Italy. So there's a 420-page report compiled in just a few weeks. Very strange for an inquiry to have been concluded so quickly. But still, it has been concluded, and it's positive that it's been made public as well, because it can too be scrutinized now. What has to, the Prime Minister yesterday said that Jason Azzopardi, the nationalist MP who signed Repubblica, who signed the case on behalf of Repubblica, the NGO, action should be taken against him by Adrian Delia. So we'll wait to see whether there's any reaction from the Nationalist Party to that effect. But I think it will also be interesting to see whether this inquiry ends this issue here, or whether the siblings of the migrants who died are going to still continue taking action against the government and seek compensation for the deaths. And also Italy over the weekend announced that it was considering charges for Malta's handling of a situation which was caught on camera, where a patrol boat seems to be endangering the lives of migrants in the water. So we need to see what comes out of that story as well. And talking about migrants, we still have the migrants outside at sea. There's four harbour cruise vessels housing about 450 migrants. The excuse originally for not taking them in was that there's the COVID pandemic. Now that that's behind us, we wonder what's going to happen next. I guess that's about it. What do you think, John?
I mean, this was a very, very big story. A lot of people had a lot of emotions about this. I mean, having the Prime Minister of your country accused of being an accomplice in the murder of migrants at sea is not a good look for anyone. I know a lot of people really felt it. I know a lot of soldiers felt it. Obviously, 11 army officers were involved in this, a brigadier, as you said yourself, Jeffrey Kermy, and Prime Minister Robert Abela. So it is interesting, actually, now that you point out how fast the inquiry happened. I mean, we're not used to seeing fast inquiries in Malta, especially, as you said, made public then. The e-grant inquiry, obviously, was never made fully public. This was done very quickly and made public. So something of note there, definitely. But it is important to notice like what the inquiry actually said. It said that, you know, there was no documented evidence or testimony to show that they had anything to do with the homicide of these migrants, and that Malta had performed its international obligations. Now, as you point out yourself, Malta's now reopening. Ships will be allowed back into Malta soon. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how long this argument is going to hold up, especially in light of the flotilla, as you mentioned. What happens if there's a death or a suicide or something on this flotilla? What's going to happen then? Will we be able to say these excuses that we've been saying at least for this inquiry?
I think we also need to remember another inquiry that was revealed a couple of weeks ago, I think, which was the inquiry into whether there is racism within the armed forces of Malta. And that inquiry basically just said no. And that's pretty strange considering 2 members of the armed forces have been charged with shooting down and killing a migrant and shooting other migrants in cold blood. Some time ago, the Lassana Cisse killing. Let's also remember that, you know, Lassana Cisse, you know, this man who was killed for no reason whatsoever, allegedly by 2 armed forces of Malta soldiers. You know, this is something that we need to reflect on as well in the context of what's happening in America with George Floyd. We'll actually be talking to 2 Maltese people of color over the next hour to discuss what's happening in America. I'm sure a lot of people are following it there, how this black man was killed at the hands of police live on camera. So yeah, I think we need to kind of remember that we also need to scrutinize inquiries and keep seeking answers in cases that there are no sufficient answers. But I think that brings us to the end of our show today, Jonathan.
I think so. I mean, a lot of food for thought today, Chris, a lot of food for thought. Guys, obviously, let us know in the comments what you thought of today's stories, or if there's any stories that you think we need to be looking at ourselves as well. And until tomorrow, have a day full of lovin'.